Top of the morning, Dan and Amy and Cornel West was on with Don Lemon to talk about the Chauvin trial and race in America. You know, Cornel West is an interesting cat. We've had him on the show before, and he's actually a lot more reasonable than he would sometimes appear when he's talking to adult like Don Lemon. But when you have the platform to be a demagogue, Cornel West is happy to indulge, as he did in this interchange.
Do we have what it takes to really acknowledge the rich humanity of black folk, to treat us fairly, to treat us like human beings? Because if not, you're going to lose your democracy. You're going under. You're going fascist. If it wasn't for black voters, especially black women voters, you would have gone fascist under the gangster named Trump.
And
I'm not going to stand there for no 9 minutes and 29 seconds and watch somebody murder my father. No. No. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about pacifism, and I believe in nonviolence, but I'm not going to watch that kind of murder. I love my brother Charles McMillan. That's why he was crying. That's what his tears were about. He felt helpless. We're not going to do that. Some of us black folk, some of us black men, we're not going to stand there. We're going to have to intervene in some way. They ain't going to kill us like that, and we remain spectators. Because somewhere I read, silence is not an option. I don't stand with the silence. That's the last two sentences of your letter to Drew, your letter to your nephew. But America needs to understand that, too. We got a self-respect. We got a self-defense. And we intervene when you start killing us like that.
Is Don crying?
yeah.
Dante. Don.
I'm sorry.
Is it that time of the
We intervene out of love, brother. Out of deep love. Do it for my day.
That was
Hello?
a nice rhetorical flourish from Cornel West, Harvard professor. But the waterworks from Don Lemon. Here would be my response to Cornel West. Professor West, something like 95% of America thinks Derrek Chauvin should be convicted of a crime, convicted of some degree of murder for his handling of George Floyd's arrest. 95%. So I'm sorry, who are you raging against?
right?
And this seems to be a bit of a recurring theme with some of this identitarian hustle. I'm sorry, who are you raging against? Because fair-minded people are opposed to injustice or the mistreatment of others. What they're not so supportive of is this scam that you're running, you see. Whether it's Black Lives Matter pitching their Marxism through the prism of race, or it's the crocodile tears from a Don Lemon pretending that he is still living in 1963 Selma rather than on the anchor desk at CNN making millions of dollars to display his room temperature IQ. For more on this, pleased to be joined again by our friend Dominic Green, the deputy U.S. editor of The Spectator. Dominic, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
Morning. The pullback is beyond the Chauvin trial, but everything is injustice and victimization all the time, even when there is no there's no opposition to the viewpoint, as in the case of the Chauvin trial, and it just gets a little bit exhausting. But it needs to be pointed out they're railing against straw men.
They are, and it has to be said, before speaking publicly about it, it might be advisable to actually watch the footage of what happened. So I'm not sure why Cornel West is talking so strongly about it without having actually seen the whole thing. But as you say, 95% of Americans recognize from that footage that a crime seems to have taken place. One of the things I noticed, because my work takes me back and forward between the US and Europe, is that so many people outside the US keep asking, what is going on? Has everybody lost their mind entirely? And the clip you just played, I mean, as you're saying, this is a Harvard professor who's basically putting on a turn. And as you say, an anchor responding by crying as if this is a kind of soap opera. And it is in the sense that it has no great relationship to reality. I'm sure Cornel West will be taking to the streets to fight you, whatever that means, as soon as he has checked his stock portfolio and so on. This is, as you say, a very profitable business, a business of permanent outrage, but it doesn't benefit the vast majority of people regardless of their color.
Well,
and I think more and more people are becoming aware of that.
And I mean, and it's just the great irony. On CNN's website, CNN story this weekend, the U.S. saw significant crime rise across major cities in 2020, and it's not letting up. What we all know to be true about the 33% increase in homicides across America last year, concentrated in the major cities, disproportionately black men. And Cornel West and Don Lemon and the rest of the left don't want to address the black men being felled in the inner cities by persons other than white police officers. That is something where they do not want to stand and do not want to intervene.
No, they don't. And the numbers are consistent and clear all over the U.S. The people who actually live in cities, black people in cities, do not want the police to abandon them. They actually want the police to be there. They certainly want the police to do a better job. I think everybody would agree of that, regardless, again, of their color. So the idea of removing the police being the answer to this, the only person who could seriously believe that is somebody who's basically living in the safe suburbs, where, they can rely on the police to be there in the background. This, again, is a theater, and again, it doesn't benefit ordinary people. And there are so many examples of this from history. You look at the history of revolutionary socialism, which is really what this is an episode in, and it's full of examples of highly educated, affluent people pushing for programs which are disastrous for the lives of ordinary people. I mean, that is socialism in a nutshell. And Cornel West, when you take away the performance on paper, is basically a sort of old-fashioned socialist. And most of the people in Black Lives Matter are also some variety of Marxist or anarchist and so on. They are using this rhetoric and using the past as a weapon against the future. But in fact, every other possible indicator suggests that the United States, since the Civil Rights Act, since the reforms of the 60s, has become a much more lawful and equal place by every possible measure.
Well, speaking of performances, what did you make of Hunter Biden's one-on-one interview with CBS yesterday?
Well, I mean, everybody knows somebody who has had trouble with drink or drugs. And it has to be said that the one thing you don't do is you don't feed the bad behavior. You don't endorse it. And I see this kind of performance from Hunter Biden is part of the problem, which is some kind of insistence on special treatment. He may be the first habitual crackhead never to have gone to jail. He may be the first habitual crackhead to have ended up on the board of Amtrak. So special treatment is what Hunter gets all the way along, and I'm afraid it's not going to help him at all. And there are serious questions to be asked. And the fact that he said that the laptop, was probably his, would tend to confirm, actually, that these questions are not just questions about the family life of the Bidens. They are questions which have a real political and security implication, because when I go abroad, people do not offer me a spot on the board of their energy company. They do not offer me an $80,000 ring and say, introduce me to your friends, because the reason is they're not going to gain anything from that. On the other hand, they will gain from Hunter Biden offering this, and it looks like he sought this out. He actively pursued these opportunities overseas as a way of funding the chaos of his life.
You know what you need, Dominic? You need a big guy in your life. I find those help.
To give the big guy 10%.
Yeah, that's right. I want to go back to something you said. Talk to a man of letters like yourself. It's important to get this perspective. You talked about this is another socialist revolutionary movement and moment in the West, and I agree with that. And and it includes the educated, the so-called intellectual set, the champagne socialists, as I call them. And they would be wise to, those individuals would be wise to learn the lesson of Louis Philippe II, the Duke of Orleans, who bankrolled a lot of the early Jacobins in France, only to find himself ultimately done in by those same Jacobins that he bankrolled. And I wonder how much of whether it's going to be in the form of a backlash or in the form of the neo-Jacobins cannibalizing themselves, you think is afoot?
I think that is the classic pattern, and we can see it. A lot of this is really a struggle for power in the upper middle class. It's exactly the kind of people who led the French Revolution, people who'd been to law school but couldn't find an upwardly mobile law career. They're the people who set up the guillotines, you know. And we have pretty much the same here. We have the overproduction of people with too many qualifications and not enough information. And so they are turning their resentments, firstly, against the people who are getting the good jobs. In other words, they're accusing someone who gets, say, a well-paid job in the media or academia or even law. They're accusing them of being racist as a way of displacing them. They're using the same attack to get rid of the generation ahead of them, to clear a few rungs on the ladder. The rest of the humanity, the vast majority of people, are collateral damage in this. And it is true that the people who are most accommodating at the top of the tree end up with their heads in the basket later on. But of course, they are in the position of the appeaser, as Winston Churchill described him, who is someone who feeds the crocodile in the hope that it will eat them last.
I want something else that extends beyond the borders of the United States, the Western world. What's happening in the religious communities, the performance of members of the clergy during these COVID lockdowns. And I want to play a bit of this Polish pastor, Arthur Pawlowski of Street Church in Canada's Alberta province, and get your reaction to what he did there in Canada and what you think is happening with clergy in the West, the United States, Canada, Britain, Western Europe.
Please get out. Get out of this property. Immediately get out. Get out of this property immediately. Out. I don't want to hear anything. Out of this property immediately. I don't want to hear a word. Out. Out. Out of this property immediately until you come back with a warrant. Out. 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 Out of this property. Immediately out. Immediately go out and don't come back. I don't want to talk to you. Not a word. Out of this out of this property. Immediately out. I don't care what you have to say. Out. Out. Out of this property, you Nazis. Out.
Obviously throwing a handful of masked Alberta police officers out of his church who came to shut down his church. He threw them out, and they sheepishly ultimately walked away as it became clear he was not interested in their viewpoint. But generally speaking, it seems to me, Dominic, and I start with my own church, the Catholic Church, that most of the clergy of all faith traditions has behaved shamelessly like sentinels of the state during these COVID lockdowns.
I'm afraid, Dan, that you're quite right. And the interesting thing is, I mean, that was in Canada. On Friday in London, a Polish church had a similar scene. The police went in and broke up the services. Perhaps it's not accidental that a Polish priest would be particularly aware of the resonances of this, because under communism, religious faith was the great resort against tyranny. It was the one consistent thing that was against some of the worst political systems we have ever seen. What has happened under COVID, of course, is not communism or fascism, but it has mean the endless and unthinking, often, expansion of state power into every aspect of our lives. And as far as I'm concerned, we should all be thinking along the lines of that priest and telling the government where the line is. And the idea that people should not pray is just astounding. I think, the vast majority of decent, sensible people know that if there, as we now have, endless trade-offs between reward and risk, every activity we now do, are we seriously going to put prayer on the list of things which is not safe enough for us to do, but we're allowed to protest in the streets. This is a preposterous inversion. This is a moral insult to everybody's intelligence. And as I said, we should oppose it. And if Cornel West wanted to use his enormous enthusiasm to good effect, he might direct it towards that kind of cause.
Yeah, and hopefully, because I think they're going to be needed. There are more modern-day Dietrich Bonhoeffers in our midst, like that pastor up in Canada. Dominic Green, Deputy U.S. Editor of The Spectator. Dominic, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.